I want to welcome Suresh, but he is not here at this moment of time. This began as an idea 2 months ago. To all of you, I'm saying now, the participants who have joined us. Thank you, Gagan. Gagan is the India Associate for the Canada-India Center for Excellence, Ottawa. Gagan has also joined us today. These are all distinguished leaders. This is not, therefore, a webinar. This is more a leaders forum. And the idea has been to see if we can get in some thinkers, thought leaders who will present their values, in this monthly series. We call it the Distinguished Lecture Series because, each of these people that we choose are pretty distinguished in what they have done and the commitment and passion they have displayed for these concerns of sustainability for decades. Last month, we had the very first of the Distinguished Lecture Series at about the same time as the Prem Jain Mahotsav. And it was on the very first day of the Prem Jain Mahotsav week. And there we had a film star of one time, a Kannada film star, who is also an acknowledged environmentalist today in India and particularly in the South, Suresh Hevlikar, who spoke on some very, very diverse subjects, very interesting in his own ways. He wasn't a domain expert, but he came from a set of concerns that also emotionally connected with the speakers. The recording is available, of course, on the PremJainMemorialTrust.com. I must also say that I'll acknowledge the presence of Padu, of Saket Saraf, many others here. Last month, it was Bangalore chapter of the IGBC which hosted this. This is an IGBC Prem Jain platform, a Prem Jain Trust platform. This month, we had requested Jeet Kumar Gupta, the chairperson of the Chandigarh chapter, who is in his own right a very distinguished urban planner, regional planner, who has done so much for Chandigarh. It's a very small city, as you all know, about 1 million as population and about 400 square kilometers. And you know the history of Chandigarh. I'm not even going to speak about that. I will let Jeet speak about his concerns from his city. The main challenge, and I will take no more than a minute or two to set the context for not for this session, because I know Ashok Lall will have his own ways of talking about the three concerns that he has, or the three realms that he's talking about. I will say that this distinguished lecture series centrally is pinned around this balance that we have to strike between GDP growth. I'm not even talking about gas, diesel, and petrol and all that. I'm talking about gross domestic product and of ecology that India needs to balance. It has to disrupt approaches. Industry has to disrupt approaches, and we all have to do it if we are leaders in architecture or in other such domains of planning. The important thing is to recognize that mere enterprise integration, for instance, a 5-star hotel doing something to improve its energy efficiency is, I think, only incremental efficiencies. Rating a building green, even if it is in the luxury space, I think is a good thing to do. I certainly don't doubt it. But my point is that we need to actually go at market transformation. From present day measures of green of this kind, where we are rating and bringing in some very healthy and good methodologies, we need to move to tomorrow's measures. We have to address, the first one only addresses symptoms if I'm going at the enterprise integration kind of approaches. What we need to actually be addressing is the causes. And that means really, truly things that are transformative. I will leave it at that. And you're all distinguished people, even among the listeners here. You're all people who are CEOs, who shape destinies of business and of your consumers in terms of how you soften the ecological footprint that they make, your consumers make. I will request now Jeet Kumar, the chairperson of the Chandigarh chapter, architect Jeet Kumar Gupta, to say a few words and to introduce the distinguished speaker of today, Ashok Lall, and then we will hand the mic over to Ashok Lall. Over to you, architect Jeet Kumar Gupta.
Thank you, Dr. Hariharan ji. I think it's both an honor and pleasure to make Chandigarh regional chapter of the IGBC as a partner in paying our tribute and homage to legendary Dr. P.C. Jain for the green built environment in India. Chandigarh chapter of IGBC is honored and privileged to be associated with Prem Jain Memorial Trust to host this distinguished lecture series and this program, which is being hosted under the guidance of Dr. Hariharan and Dr. Jain, the founder trustee. I think it will be wonderful to listen to the what has to be communicated and what has to be learned and what has to be uh, told to the society, that how we have to grow further. We have best of the keynote speaker who doesn't need an introduction, and he is known for his words, his commitment, his sincerity, both in the field of architectural education and also in the field of academics and also in practice, for his commitment to this sustainability and using practices which can make buildings really green in the real sense of the term, I would say. Having a practice of 40 years, Dr. Mr. Ashok B Lall is known for his credibility, for his commitment, for his sincerity, uh, which he has demonstrated while carrying out different categories of projects which require no mention. And he's a ardent, I would say, promoter in both education, architectural education, and also architectural practice, to set a kind of ethos and norms and standard for architects which can be followed in making this world more sustainable. I think he's a real practitioner and also, I would say, a preacher and a guru in the sense of sustainable built environment. Can I have the pleasure to invite him to, speak on this topic, which he has three realms and practice of architecture, to go into length, breadth, and explore all the dimension of architectural education and, profession, that how it can be made more responsive, more conducive, more, as a contributor to the global sustainability and making this planet Earth a happy and a nice place to live and work. I leave it here, and of course, I'm. I will be speaking after he finishes. I can make. He will be talking about buildings. I'll be talking about a city in brief, which will be basically well-known city in the country, and that's the city of Chandigarh. So I'll end up this and request architect Lal, Dr. Lal, to come and just enlighten us with his words of wisdom in architectural education and practice. Mr. Lal, please.
Thank you very much for your very, very kind words. I think you overstated so many things, but thanks all the same. Let me share my screen. Now where are we? This is the one. And I share it. And now I have to go full screen. Are you seeing my screen? Yes, you are.
Please. Yes.
Right. So I've this slight change in the title here. It's called Three Dimensions in Multiple Realms, Engaging the Practitioner. I had prepared somewhat a long thing, but I think I'll cut it short so that we can have more discussion and question and answer. That would be more appropriate, I think, listening to Hari. So let me move on. I have thought that it's important to, in a brief biographical way, to share with you what it means to be a designer of the built environment as a professional working in a social and economic context. It's really how these ideas and these thoughts grew and became a philosophy of work. That's what I want to kind of share with you. what we see, this image is this famous Greek vase. And I'm saying it's a Greek vase because that's what I saw first. But if you don't look at the Greek vase, you see the two profiles of two persons, right? You see the silhouettes of two faces. And this is really symbolic of some of the dilemmas of practicing as a designer of the built environment. There are two facts that belong to this picture that we see. But for some reason, we are able to perceive only one at a time. There's a shortcoming in our perceptual apparatus. It's very difficult for us to see both of them at the same time. And so if you think of cities and if you think of the built environment, if you imagine that these faces or these silhouettes are silhouettes of people who are responsible for making the city come about. They are the practitioners and they're the theorists, they are the planners, they're the designers. And what comes as a result of their thought process is what is contained in the vase. It's the built environment that results. And then not only are they setting the scene for what the built environment is going to be, but there are many other participants who shape it from within, all the users, all the citizens, and all the complexity of life in a city that shapes the city finally. When I started out as an architect, or as an architectural student, I should say, you know, this was in the UK at that time, and we all were part of what you might call a world of aesthetics, philosophy, arts, culture. And these masters, Frank Lloyd Wright on the left side, Le Corbusier in the middle, Mies van der Rohe, these are the giants that ruled our imagination. These were the giants that ruled our imagination. But you know, we learned of them principally as philosophers, aestheticians, and people who made cultural objects that would be revered and admired by society. They'll become possessions of the heritage of the built environment. You know, the cultural objects. That's what architects were supposed to do, makers of cultural objects. That's what we learned. But as we delved into it a little further, we discovered that whether it was Le Corbusier and whether it was Frank Lloyd Wright, and then later, as we met with Mr. Doshi, we saw that Europe and the Americas were being built rapidly after the devastation of the Second World War. And much of their thinking was about establishing a new society, rebuilding the world to imagine the possibility of a democratic realm where everybody had a great chance. So what we see is that apart from being a maker of cultural artifacts, the designer of the built environment becomes a development practitioner. The designer of today is thrown into a rapidly changing world of increasing social and environmental stress. That's true of today in our part of the world. So in conceiving a building and designing for a world with less stress and more harmony, the designer becomes a development practitioner, a contributor to the quality of life in his broadest sense. Another thing happened. This was when I was finishing my years of architectural studies. I joined what was then called the Tropical Studies Department at the Architectural Association. And that was established by Otto Königsberger, who actually was also the person who prepared or helped in preparing the first master plan for the city of Delhi. Königsberger started a department of what was then called tropical studies. And you know, we got introduced to this thing called climatology. This was in 1968-70. all right? We got introduced to climatology, and it was a very simple idea that there is no reason why, as we build in different parts of the world and in different climates, we shouldn't be thinking of how the building responds to the climate and how the building itself would interact with the climate to make the inside spaces more appropriate, more comfortable in that climate. And so climatology got established at around 1965, in that decade. And it became quite a rigorous science. And then, since then, there has been a general movement, and it is something to do with, you had the first Middle East war, and suddenly the oil supplies were shut down, or there was an oil crisis. And so people said, okay, well, let's go back to solar passive architecture. They call it solar passive architecture. In Europe, they were talking about catching the energy from the sun so that you can warm your spaces and you don't have to rely on oil anymore. Then they talked about bioclimatic design when this concept got referred to different parts of the world. And then as you realize that oil is actually a limited resource in the final analysis, that there has to be something called low energy architecture. And this went on. Eventually, after the Rio conference, the notion that it would have to be broader than simply energy, environmentally sustainable architecture was born. And later on, as the developing world started growing rapidly, especially the tigers of the Southeast, they were growing rapidly. You suddenly realize there's going to be so much building that architecture has to play a part as sustainable development, play a part in the strategy for sustainable development of these worlds, of these societies, of these aspirational societies across South America, now Africa, and the East. So that's a very brief history of how you move from climatology to architecture for sustainable development. Well, you can see these two pictures. What we see at the bottom is at the expense of what we saw at the top of this picture. That was the death of the environment of the seas, and with the rapidity and the scale of production of the built environment, which is causing environmental degradation and ecological stress, now a designer must also necessarily become a steward of the environment. So here we are. These are the three realms I'm talking about. That architecture is and will always remain a cultural artifact, equivalent to poetry and music and song. It will always remain a cultural artifact. And that is where it actually has its communicative power. But in doing so, it must also be a development practice. It must be done in ways that promote development of society, looking at its current issues that concern most of us citizens, and then finding solutions for them. And in doing that, it must also be a stewardship of the environment that architecture grows out of. So what I'm going to do is going to just share some small, some slightly more complex projects, some built and some not built, because I think even when something is not built, its ideas are worthwhile and it's worth sharing them with you all. So this is a tiny little project called Butterflies for an NGO on the outskirts of Delhi in an urban village, squeezed in a rapidly changing urban village in a long, narrow plot. Is a society that is looking after street children and providing them wherewithal to grow into independent, skilled persons. So this is what this Butterflies is about. And they said that we would like to build in such a way that is, sustainable and incorporates the best practices of green. So the first thing about it was in a long, narrow plot. serviced by a narrow lane, we are saying that we are densifying an existing urban village. What should we do? How do we go about it? What is the morphology of densification that we can develop? So within this lane, there is a long plot, and on the edge of this plot, there's an inner lane. And this inner lane effectively connects 3 buildings around tiny courtyards. So this is like discovering a morphology that will be climatically suitable and maintain pretty good densities with good light, ventilation, and everything, and also accommodate a variety of functions within, just like the old city used to do. So here you can see two courtyards bringing light and air even down to a basement. And so the basement was a kind of a resource. It was where the earth came out from, and that earth could then be converted into earth blocks, cement stabilized earth blocks that could be used for raising the building. So the idea that as an existing city or an urban village regenerates, actually what's happening is a lot of stuff is being taken down and a lot of stuff is being built anew. And there needs to be an attempt at a circular economy within such urban precincts and urban systems. So the first thing is, of course, we take the earth out from the ground and convert it into bricks. And then, if you can see on the right-hand side, you scout around and see what can you get secondhand over here. Doors, windows, stones, metal, what can you get secondhand over here? And see if you can incorporate that into your building. And then, as you design, very dense, like the old cities, teeny courtyards, but you design them in such a way that light does get down to the bottom. And in winters, the upper story gets plenty of sunshine. And you can get the air and wind blowing through or flowing across the spaces to maintain reasonable comfort. And then you make the courtyards very special, right? And you integrate ventilation systems, exhausts, cooling pads, evaporative cooling, a little fountain in the courtyard as a way of producing reasonable comfort without air conditioning in the spaces of different kinds of uses. And you will also have a rooftop, which will then convert into a vegetable garden. Within that plot, you must see how you handle water, how you collect the rain, how you use that water, store it, utilize it, treat it, recirculate it, and then use it again for your roof garden and call it flushing. Well, this is how we imagined the children's dormitory to be. And here are the kids now peeping out from their dormitories with secondhand windows, as you can see. Everything is gathered from the local market, believe it or not. And this is the middle courtyard. And we were lucky sometimes to get some really beautiful doors and windows too. We just scout around in the local market. And the little courtyards, you can see how little courtyards can do wonders, right? In a climate like Delhi. And on the rooftop, you can add solar PV. And here you can see how the earth blocks are part of the interior spaces for people to know that actually this building is built majorly out of the material that came out from the basement. And well, it's an aspirational building. And this staircase on the right-hand side is on the roof. It leads to the sky. And believe it or not, that's where children like to be most. So it's not only about the recycling and the materials and the climatology. It is about how it produces a certain sense of well-being as you connect with the environment around you. And this screen in front is an artwork. It's actually a screen on the southern side of their main meeting and teaching room, which also actually serves as a cafe or a training kitchen, which is behind that. And you can see the solar PV array at the very top. So it's stories being told. And this you can modify this story as you flip the boards around. And if you look at it from the inside, you can darken the space if you want to project something for discussion and for viewing. So, well, I would say that in a small project, what are we doing? Are we producing a cultural artifact? Of course we are. We're also engaging in development practice. We are supporting a certain kind of healing of society with young boys and girls can grow up with a sense of pride and feeling special about being given a place like this. And we're also doing that by taking care of environmental impact. Well, moving to another scale. This is a painting by a famous artist. I'm forgetting his name just now, but it's about this. It's about a map of the world in which Majnu is wandering the streets of a town looking for Layla. And then there are different kinds of people that and spiritual beings that surround this world. And so it's about a world of hope, an unending hope, the search for your beloved life. But this is what we are seeing today. We are still searching for our beloved life as we wander through this city. Well, here's an imagination. Abdul Kalam, when he was president, put to the Ministry of Power a question. He said, you, the Ministry of Power, can you not do something on the presidential estate which will produce enough electricity to look after the needs of presidential estate, or the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the estate as a whole? So they got down to it. They went to the Tata Energy Research Institute, or the Energy Research Institute, as it is now called. And then we teamed up and we tried to find a solution. And this was an imagination which perhaps was an extension of the idea produced by Joseph Stein at the Habitat Center in Delhi, which was that it's an urban space, but an urban space with a difference. It has a convention center and a set of office blocks. And the structural grid of this entire space is actually a set of columns that carry photovoltaic trees as a rooftop, okay? So here you have the idea that you have a city in which you have 3 to 3.5 stories high columns carrying solar PV arrays, under which the public spaces of the city can stay, and occasionally these trees give way to natural trees and to larger spaces within. So the photovoltaic trees provide the shade as well as the electricity. And in section, this is how it looks like. Again, the idea was that you excavate a basement and produce most of the building material for the walls, etc., using the material that comes out from the basement. And the rooftop, once again, becomes a shaded garden under the solar PV trees. Well, this is just a test. It so happened that President Kalam didn't stay on as president long enough to see his dream through, and the project was shelved. Well, many good ideas have that ending. But nevertheless, I think there are important lessons. Here is a kind of a bird's eye view of the solar PV trees spreading across the urban realm, and a new kind of urbanism for a future solar city. There you are. And you can extend that idea even to urban villages, like in this proposal for the rejuvenation of one of the urban villages in Delhi. Well, I'm just going to move on to now housing. Just talk about it because it really is the biggest challenge that we face as we urbanize. homes for everyone. And I call it we can opportunities for collective living. That's the way I characterize it. And when it comes to housing, especially as we urbanize, as we seek a way in which the poorer sections of our citizenry have the possibility of looking for a better future within this generation, not 2, not 3, but within this generation, we have to look at the aspirational trajectory that everybody is on. We have to take care of their basic necessities. We have to provide for their psychological aspirations. And we have to give them a space in the city where they can build a life of self-fulfillment. That's what housing is about. It's not a numbers game. It is not PMAY supported by so much subsidy on whatever you call it. It's not about high density, high rise, because that's the numbers we need. It's about producing a future society who enjoy the spaces they live in, where they find self-fulfillment. Well, what we do when we build, we have to ensure the basics: health and sanitation, safety, and sustainability. That means water security, energy security, land security, with biodiversity, and a way of treating your waste so that you can build it into a local circular economy. And out of that can arise the possibility of a life of self-esteem. So here's the challenge. How do we make that we care part, the basic part, affordable for 70% of our citizens, while providing for what will become, when they say we will reach somewhere, give them the foundation to make their future? How do we do that? That's the challenge of design. I won't go into this theory, but let's move on. So we came to the solution that you have to have some sort of systems building in which there are standardized ways of construction which are swift, easy to build, economical, but allow you a great deal of flexibility in the type and arrangement of units that you can build. So as you can see at the top, you basically have a 3-meter bay width, which can be organized around strings of passages, and you can have E-shaped buildings, L-shaped buildings, snake-shaped buildings, and you can assemble these 3-meter wide units into different sizes as you go along to provide for different sizes of households and different levels of affordability. And the system is such that it is semi-industrialized. Components can be prefabricated and attached to the basic structure, which may be built on site. And as you design, you must design as if you're living in those spaces. You must visualize every activity, whether it is cooking or lying down or meeting people or doing whatever. But it's, I see so much layout plans in which you have these transferred icons of furniture and so on and so forth. They look like somewhere in the United States or whatever. They don't imagine life being lived inside. It's only when you test the design by this kind of drawing that you know what you're doing. And not only should you design for now, the systems should design for a changing future. This happened in Singapore. Buildings that were built in the 1960s and 70s are now being reworked internally to increase the sizes of homes. And here too, we see this happening in old buildings and even in housing schemes that are being, if you look at the DDA housing scheme, my God, the amount of changes they are going through in Delhi, it's because they're responding to real needs and because standards of living have improved. And so the design of the building system should anticipate the potential of reconfiguration of spaces over a period of time. This run towards all RCC construction that we are seeing today, I don't know why we are doing it. It's not serving environment. It is not serving society. It's not serving patterns of living. It is not serving a formation of a habitable or a city with streets. It's producing something that we'll regret for 70 years to come as we build these buildings. We really must think hard about that. This is the kind of building that we can have, a series of places, 4 to 5 stories high. And here, of course, you try and lay everything out according to the priorities of orientation so that you can protect yourself as much as possible from the blistering sun. And so there are 3 levels. We care, we take care of the social needs. We take care of the family. Imagine family life being lived. Look at this bathroom. It shows a person bathing a child, a lady bathing a child. Now that's what is needed, or a person bathing an elderly person. That's what the bathroom is for. Okay? You must imagine how life will be lived for several generations living together. You must imagine how neighbors will live with each other, how neighborhoods will be formed. What will be the sense of shared security? What will be the sense of neighborliness? How do spaces create communities and neighbors? Again, it's not just about numbers. I must emphasize this again and again. It's about buildings that you can walk through from one building to the next, through the courtyard and form a street and so on, so that you feel that you're living in a lived-in environment, not a packed-in environment, but a lived-in environment. And of course, we care. First responsibility is to make sure that health and hygiene are protected, that you'll have clean air, that you'll have thermal comfort, that you'll have a waste disposal system built into your design, that you'll make sure that waterborne diseases will not be present, drainage should be good, and safe drinking water must be guaranteed. Composting must happen on site, and toilets must be easy to clean, and you must build in ways that you can keep the cockroaches and the mosquitoes out of the house. All this to be affordable. And of course, take care of the elderly, universal design. 3 basic issues: water efficiency, energy efficiency, and maintenance and regulation of a services infrastructure. These systems need to be set up and maintained with religious sincerity. Religious sincerity. At the moment, they become little businesses with a lot of fighting in residents' associations about who controls the money. The basic intent is forgotten. How do we build that culture? We as designers of the built environment. And I think this is where institutions like the IGBC have a strong role to play. How do you create that culture amongst the new societies, the new communities that are being formed or will be formed in these housing estates, that they can care for their environment as a collective? And as you establish, you need all these things. You need a system of receiving people. You need a system of supporting people as they set up their home. You need a system of information and communication amongst the residents of a community. You need transport connectivity. Now you have a bargaining power if you are a group of people living in an estate with the transport authorities or with any other kind of transport provider to make your connectivity much better. And you also need to connect with trade and exchange of various kinds of things that you need to set up your life quickly in the new housing environment. Here's an interesting idea. When we were building a block of flats, this is in Chennai, people said they don't like to live upstairs. But if you design it as streets in the air, like this was done, very soon we found that it was working because people had more neighbors and children could tricycle up and down these little passages and make friends. And this is how it has worked. And of course, even plantation has to take care of how they integrate with the buildings. And of course, the water system is integrated. Now, this is important. If you're building, say, 300 to 400 homes together, all this waste composting and recycling and treatment of water, waterborne waste and recycling of that actually becomes affordable for affordable housing, for low-cost housing. Very simple, but notice the framework around the balconies and framework around the windows. We had to fight hard for it with our developer. This framework is the minimum that you can provide. And this is the basis from which people will make modifications and improvements to their own homes. Like this. They should be free to do so. Or like this. And you have to help people see how it is possible to live in their new homes. So here we have someone from office offering a tulsi plant to households, placing the plant in their balcony, and lo and behold, 1.5 years later, many balconies now have plants outside the windows. But here's the biggest difficulty of designing for an anonymous client, housing systems. Really difficult. How do you assume what people need and what they want? How their needs vary from household to household. So in another project, we actually tried to work out alternatives. And then we had focus group meetings with prospective clients or prospective buyers. And we gave each house a particular name. And then we discussed with different groups, young boys, young girls, ladies, elderlies, and the income earners for the family. Take their different views. And we gave them a kit to organize their internal spaces. Interestingly, no two internal house designs were the same. None of them was the same. Everybody had slightly different requirements. So a design for flexibility somehow is essential. This is how it was. And then people voted. Which of these types do you think work best for you? And this is how we made a selection for this next project. Of course, there's building construction. Well, here we evolved a new way of building using not earth blocks, but concrete blocks that interlock. Very thin walls, 150 to 170 millimeters wide, that can be assembled very quickly and partially reinforced. And this system has now been tested. Very low steel consumption, 2.3 kilograms of steel per square foot of built area, and similarly flooring systems. But then, this is what we are looking for. You should build a prototype if you're building using a new technology, build a prototype, equip it as if you're going to live in it fully, and then actually live in it. So here's the designers who made a film as if they were living in these homes. This was their test of their own design. I think this is one of the most difficult aspects of designing for an anonymous client, especially in housing, which tends to be repetitive. How do you really respond to varying needs by simple systems? And the important thing we realized was there's no such thing as one size fits all. In any community, there will have to be more than 2 or 3 types of homes and buildings. That is what creates an urban fabric that is varied and lively. And this is another thing that's now been established, that you can actually very easily, if you've got, say, 300, 400 units, you can design for decentralized supply. water,
electricity
also. This is the Avadi housing now occupied. Mr. Suresh was kind enough to think that this deserved a platinum rating. There he is. Well, I must say the residents really enjoyed it. Here is New Year's Eve at Avadi. A community is established. And I call it the opportunity for collective living. You cannot do for yourself if you were to build each one your own little slum house. What you can do if you come together as a community, you can do much more. And I think that's the secret of urban life. Well, this is a general statement, and I just wanted to read it out aloud. And it goes against the grain of what is happening in our country at the moment. And it just says that if the conception of the city is that it is an instrument of wealth generation through the exploitation of land by real estate, then, this is my conclusion, we are doomed to perpetuation of a divided city where half the population will live under environmental and legal stress. But if the conception of the city is that it is a developmental engine for the distribution of wealth within the framework of environmental sustainability, then we are on a sustainable path. And we need to design the development of the city with this as its salient objective. The salient objective of inclusive benefits. The city is the engine for equitable social and economic development. The city is the engine. I'm now completely changing gear to something quite different. Now taking the idea of what you call the cultural artifact as the leading thought. Well, two places that have brought tears to my eyes. On the left is the Alhambra Palace built by Arabs in Spain many centuries back. And on the right is the famous house of our famous Mexican landscape artist, architect. I'm forgetting his name just now, I don't know why. But so on the right, you have a stoic Catholic believer where space is completely dematerialized and everything is absolutely basic. On the left, you have an elaboration, something which is like a repetition of the beautiful word, of the Great Spirit. And it's in the elaboration with little intonational variations that you sense the beauty of life. Two very different sensibilities, each leading to the same eventual purpose, I think. On the left, you might say in Hinduistic terms, it's a bit Vaishnav. And on the right, you might say in Hinduistic terms, it's Shaivite. And I think the twain can live together. I tend to be a bit Vaishnav, I must say, in my way of doing things. Let me share with you another project that didn't get built. This was the design for a museum, an interpretation center for the Qutub Shahi mosques in Hyderabad. An Aga Khan promoted idea, competition, where at the bottom you have a little space where you had to build this center and an amazing set of monuments, commemorative monuments spread out on this park, brought together beautifully by a landscape design by Professor Shahid, beautifully done. And the idea was to somehow to fit into that seamlessly, yet remember that architecture of the past. And so here is the invitation wall, which does not speak in English, but speaks in the local languages. And this is the way into the center, taking a ramp down under the ground. Most of it is under the ground with little bits sticking out over the top. And the way it is laid out is that it respects and refers to the old monuments and the circulation paths that surround them, as if it is seamless. And you produce a garden on the roof of these underground buildings. Just like this. The interpretation center is below the paved areas, and these little projections above have a particular function, which you will see in a minute. Here you are in one of the galleries, and the middle portion pops up, gets the daylight in. And punctures into little courtyards, light the basement spaces. But this is what I really want to talk about. How do you build this? On the left-hand side, you see some decorative features in the existing buildings. That idea is picked up. And the idea of building domes in something that has existed in Western UP in Haryana for over a century now. These are masons who can build shallow domes without shuttering, where the rise of the dome is just 1 inch every foot, right? 1 in 12 rise of the dome. They don't even need to draw it or put up scaffolding. They have it in their muscles and their bones. They just do it automatically. And so the idea is you build a compressive structure using these masons without any steel as the domes to the galleries. So you reduce your environmental footprint, no steel used. All the retaining walls are made out of stone, no steel used. And these corners are actually structural columns, but built out of stone, but they also become the ventilators and evaporatively coolings and systems integrated with an evaporative cooling system, right? For circulation of air into the galleries. And this circulation, this water, picks on the bowlies of the complex. There are 3 or 4 beautiful bowlies that have been regenerated once again, and that water can be brought into cooling the inside spaces of this exhibition gallery underground. And this is not just an idea, it is tested scientifically by simulation. And we could see how the indoor temperatures went down substantially when you went underground and when you added evaporative cooling into the ventilation system. So here is a low environmental impact solution to a modern museum. And let me now conclude very quickly with a classic building of our office, the Development Alternatives building. Let me just go through it quickly. I just want to point out a few things. One of the big things in this, of course, was that the project was developed out of intensive discussion and consultation with the Development Alternatives community. All members and through the hierarchy of their organization till the decision-making level. Extensive consultation about how they wanted their building to be. And we devised a system using shallow domes and walls to reduce the consumption of steel. And we recycled all the earth that came out of the demolished existing building, which was made out of mud. All the earth that came out of it was pulverized and recast into cement stabilized blocks. This, in combination with fly ash blocks, became the infill masonry in a light RCC frame. And this is how these shallow domes were built. In this case, using scaffolding. Here they are, no steel. And this has survived a number of earthquakes already. And this is how these shells were made on site and lifted up by a hoist, just a rope and tackle. No big cranes required. And this integrated the cooling system of the building. You know, really, I mean, we substituted all the conventional materials. No aluminum is used for doors and windows. We use harvested teak. The external walls are all either block, earth block or fly ash block. And stone slabs are used to span across the shells. And this produces its own aesthetic. And we do an analysis of the whole thing. And I just want to focus on this one slide, which shows that in this building, by mass, steel is 2.86% of the mass of the building. By cost, steel is 34.71% of the cost of the building. In embodied energy, steel is 63.26% of the total embodied energy of the building. So here's the message. Use steel most economically. Work out systems that are less dependent on steel. And don't build and commit yourself to building types, whether it is multi-story tall buildings or buildings completely built out of concrete, which are intensive in steel. You are running away from sustainable development. Here's another very important principle. If we have to build quickly, we have to industrialize construction. But the industrial principle is to be distinguished from mechanization and automation to displace human agency. Rather, it is to be reconstructed as systems of liberating many initiatives and imaginations with the benefit of appropriate that you see in this roof over here, the shells, etc. These are all semi-industrialized systems where small-scale industry can produce all these objects and can vary them according to need, right? It doesn't displace labor. It doesn't completely industrialize.
We are losing you, Ashok. We are losing you, Ashok. Yes, Rajanji. Yeah.
I think there is a network problem, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, he will. Yeah. Ashok?
Mobile se contact karo.
Yeah. I think we lost Ashok. Doesn't matter. We have, well, it's already 6:37. Yeah. There you are, Ashok. We can't hear you, but Ashok, you have to unmute. Can you unmute him, please? No, the host machine. You have to unmute Ashok Lall.
Have I unmuted now?
I think so, yes. We can
hear
you now. Ashok, it's 6:37. I'd like you to see if you can close in 2-3 minutes so we can have some little bit of interaction. We have 3 speakers. Suresh has to speak at others. Yeah.
Please.
Go on. Please.
No, I've concluded. I've just finished.
You're done. Wonderful.
I'm done.
Wonderful. Very nice. I must say that, there is so much cadence in every phrase that you speak, and it comes so naturally to you in your domain. Search for our beloved lives, or, many lines like that you brought up. It's this is going to go up on YouTube, so that a lot more, many more hundreds of people can watch this over time. Can I, JK, since you are the host chapter, can I request Coimbator's chapter chair Rajesh Lund to speak for only 60 seconds, not more than that, on what he has to offer in the next month's session. Rajesh Lund. Yes, please.
Thank you, Hari, for giving me the job, giving the Coimbatore chapter the opportunity to host next month meeting. First, I would like to thank Arun Lal ji for his excellent presentation. A lot of learning from it. Next month, as you requested me, I have asked Mrs. Vanita Mohan. She's the chairperson of Pricol Limited, and she started an NGO called Sirthali, which has, Coimbatore had about 140 water bodies. And in the main city, we had about 12 water bodies. She started a mission to reclaim all these water bodies. And she has succeeded in this. And Coimbatore city, the water levels have gone up, and this has become a people's movement. And in fact, the Coimbatore smart city is completely based on these water bodies. So she has faced many challenges, and there's a lot of learning for everybody, for other city leaders also, to learn from what has happened in Coimbatore. So I request all to join in for the next month's session.
Wonderful. That will be on March 27, again a Saturday. Again, it will be at the same time at 5:30 p.m. For those of you who are here. And of course, the invitations will go out to all people. You know, when Ashok Lal speaks about shortcomings in our perception apparatus, or when he talks about, masons who have in their muscles and their bones this ability to construct without steel, he brings poetry actually while he's being, really pragmatic in what he's seeking from them. He's an extremely demanding architect, obviously, if he's going to get the sort of work that he's done, that he's got from people. And when he talks about, the anonymous end client and the challenge for the architect to be able to address that anonymous client's need and not this business person who's going to pay the money or spend the money on the project, he is defining a challenge on a dimension that often is forgotten by most promoters. You, Rajesh, you are a promoter yourself of buildings, and you can see what that is. And to hear him say that 53 years ago, in 1968, he was talking about climatology. And, look at that phrase. And before I hand it over to V. Suresh, I must just state this. Somewhere he says, there is no reason why, if I recall him right, he says, no reason why a building should not respond to and interact with whatever the local climate is. It seems commonsensical, but to have said that or to have learned it in 1968, and to have set up a practice 13 years later in 1981, and done the kind of iconic work that he's done, and yet remain as humble as he continues to be, I think is a great, is a wonderful thing for a human being, for a person who's as humane as Ashok Lal is. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. I mean, it's been a privilege knowing you and for the extended conversations I've had with you. V. Suresh, maybe 2-3 minutes from you on what you heard today and what it means for not just the IGBC, but for the building community itself. And then I will request participants to speak a little, then Jeet Kumar will give us some few things.
Okay. No, I'm very happy that I joined to hear Ashok. It's always a pleasure to hear Ashok at any point of time. And he has brought in so many new issues in this particular presentation than his earlier many presentations there.
Right.
That is still novel. In fact, what I should say is each one of his particular is a visually impactful frames. And as I'm using both the words of phrases and frames put together in a very powerful way, and you're able to get across the idea. And
can I ask you a question, Sureshji? Yeah. When he says, don't build high rises and stay away from steel as much as you can, because that's not the way for sustainability. How will you take this into industry?
Yeah, I liked it very much, because as a matter of fact, as long as you're able to get low-rise, high-density buildings, you don't require high-rise, number one. Since I am living in my house, whole thing speaks for all that Ashok wants to do that, having the least amount of steel. I have a
but as chairperson of IGBC, you have to speak.
Yeah, I'm talking about that. See, the idea is to see that how can you use technologies by which you will least amount of steel and least amount of cement and concrete use. I'm not saying don't use at all. You should use it effectively, economically, efficiently, and very importantly, environmentally sustainable, because as it is, the embodied energy becomes an important component. So far, even in the green building movement, anywhere, they have only talked about the operational energy component. The embodied energy of the building materials has not been fully taken into account in using that. We need to do that. That will be the next step forward to do that. And I'm very happy that all the examples that he has quoted over there uses the way in which the space can be utilized. First was the issues on use of space in the design of the particular building with courtyards and other related one for different categories of people. And the second component was using the technologies rightly, and whether it's a stabilized mud block component or various other.
Sure. All that is taken.
Each one is really very well taken. And what all he said is all doable, absolutely doable. It's in the mindset of the people that we think that something else is stronger, this is not stronger.
I hope, what you said about, the IGBC rating, recognizing embodied energy as a vital value for credits is taken by the IGBC seriously. And you need to see how you articulate that while I will speak to.
It will positively come over there. As a matter of fact, that's the next level. When you want to go into net zero carbon in a large way, carbon can come, you use the energy reduction, also coming from the various building material block. And I like the diagram that he showed over there.
Okay, right.
The energy coming on the steel production.
The
contribution is so little, but together that is very powerfully brought it out. And the very fact that the cost-effective, appropriate technologies using environment-friendly option is definitely a doable thing. You yourself have done it, Chandra, in the last 20 years back, 10 years back. Now we have slightly stepped back, but otherwise, you demonstrated in your own. We are all aware of it. Ashok speak, you try the right chord. It's really doable. But what I like is the big triangle that he gave over there, what a house can mean, and not just into the numbers, a statistical one.
Absolutely.
We have to build upon that.
Yeah. When he says about it's a space for psychological aspirations, he said.
Yes.
And for self-fulfillment as housing goes. He meant that,
Yes. And I think it's an important one. If you're able to contribute to that particular building up in a large way. Of course, you get the wall, you get the roof, you get the space to build.
Got it. Yeah. Then of course, for want of time, I will invite now.
Half a minute more. I'm happy that Rajesh Lund has joined very briefly to tell that Shiritulli is going to come over there on 26th. And that's an amazing initiative, which just with small drops.
That's right.
Small drops. How that great lady has transformed through the contribution of water conservation and management. Rajesh is on the frame. So glad. I'm glad that you're bringing her. And she has really revolutionized the whole area. I'm very happy that it's going to happen. Rajesh, we talked about you today in the morning session. We missed you. I could talk to you once more.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll put them on later. Not time on that.
Okay. Can I now request, for another 3-4 minutes, any interactions, anybody else who wants to offer, since you're all leaders in some ways, if there are any, I won't say questions, but any observations or insights you want to share with either Architect Ashok Lall or to all of us. Anyone who wants to share, please unmute. The host will help you on that. And speak your thought if there is anything you want to say. It's 6:47. We're already a little behind time, but it doesn't matter. Anyone who wants to speak, please.
Any on the chat box? Anybody?
Anyone who wants to unmute and speak. You're welcome.
Hello.
Yes, please. Who is this? Sriram Narayanan. Hello, how are you? You're speaking from Illinois all the way. Good morning to you.
Hi.
Yes,
I don't have a comment because I'm not really a buildings person, but I do have a question that, with so much population pressure in all of these cities, and of course, there are lots of challenges for resources that we face. How feasible it is to avoid high rises, because high rises may be a potential way to accommodate people and give better housing. So what is your view on that?
Sure. Ashok, before you speak, let me tell you who Sriram is. He teaches sustainable supply chain at Lansing in Illinois. Go on, please.
Yeah, just to respond to your point, if you were to deeply analyze the availability of land in and around our urban areas and the growth of especially the second tier and third tier cities, I'm not talking about Mumbai only, of course, or Bangalore for that matter. I'm talking about there's 800, 900 second tier and third tier cities. There's plenty of land available. And in fact, from the last census, we saw that the rate of growth of populations in the big cities is slowing down, and the middle size in the small cities is rising because life is actually more livable in the smaller town. And so if you keep the sharks of land developers away from free market economy hoarding land, then you have plenty of land and you can produce humane cities.
Sure.
And so this requires some deeper analysis. The assumption that you have to have high rise is only an arithmetic assumption, which is myopic.
Sure. Sriram, let me add to this by saying that we still don't have any more than 150,000 square kilometers of urban geographic spread in India against 3.3 million square kilometers that India has as landmass. The trouble is that the cost of land sometimes is artificially pushed up to a point where a builder, and now I'm speaking in defense of a builder, has to necessarily do higher FSI because the land price discounts the FSI. I leave it there. It's a larger discussion. We'll talk another time. Anyone else who wants to speak, please, before I hand the mic over to Chief Kumar Gupta. Yes, please.
Hello,
yes, please.
This is Arun.
Yes, please.
Hariharan ji and Ashok Lall, it was a wonderful presentation. And sitting here in the first world, I'll say the first world needs India very much right now.
Absolutely.
Sitting here, I will not, यहाँ की थाली में छेद नहीं करूँगा मैं, but India is very much required everywhere, and YouTube is something which can distribute it. Hello, Ashok Lall.
Hi.
40 years of knowing you and 40 years of knowing V. Suresh.
Wonderful.
Okay, we'll continue later.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking up. Very nice. Anyone else who wants to say anything before Architect Jeet Kumar takes over? Okay. All right. So over to you, Architect Jeet Kumar Gupta. On some notes on Chandigarh to whatever that you want to speak about, and then to conclude the session.
Thank you, Hariharan ji. I think it was wonderful to listen how the building can be designed using local technology, local knowledge, local materials, and how can be the cost effective. In fact, you know what Dr. Lall was trying to say, that we have to graduate from affordable housing to affordable living, you know. I think this is a change in attitude which is required. And if we also go in designing from area-based approach to volume-based approach, I think it will be helping us in creating more number of dwelling units and maybe rationalizing the total space for the household, you know. Ultimately looking at that it's a high rise, it's a low rise versus high rise, I think the mandate is very clear. High rise are very expensive. They can't make you, you know, affordable in the longer run, on the life cycle run. One has to look at the solutions which are basically walkable apartments, you know, and they uses material technology which remains, which involve minimum of maintenance cost, you know. I would add here, remind, you know, 1948, when Chandigarh was built, the question was the money. The city, the country did not have money. Punjab even did not have money. So they were only given 10 crore of rupees to build this city, you know, a city for 500,000 people. And then the greatest challenge was, you know, how to provide best of infrastructure, best of, you know, standards of housing. That is minimum 2 rooms with a flush toilet, kitchen, and all, you know, waterborne and this piped water supply. That was the mandate given to architects, and the way they experimented, the way they innovated, I think that itself is a solution that in 1950, they were able to, you know, evolve best of the architecture. The Chandigarh architecture is never a premeditated design. It was a architecture which was dictated by economy, local climate, and of course, the material, and there was no technology available. So the wisdom they used, the kind of mechanism they used, I think that makes a wonderful experimentation and knowledge sharing. If we can all ever do a job that they did that in the 1950s to create best of the living option. So that remains wherever it is. But the question is very well taken, and the solutions are very well provided, that we have to think out of the box. And secondly, the solutions are not from outside. Solutions are available right within the context where we are living. Only question is we have to look, and we have to be very clear. Architects are primarily afraid of experimentation, and that's where Mr. Lall has been a promoter of an idea that you can do it. It's provided there's a will to do it. But his connect with the regard to city, that city is the engine of equitable social and economic development. I think cities are full of dualities and contradiction. I think we now going for cities from one, stage to other city. We look for cities which are cooperative cities. I think it is not the city which have individual ownership, but a cooperative ownership. The moment we have cities built on the cooperative ownership, I think city will prove to be engine of equitable social and economic development. Otherwise, cities believe in exclusion, and the larger the city, more the exclusion they promote. And cities remain, a mosaic of dualities and contradiction, where poverty and prosperity, they rub shoulder with another. So this is a issue, which we have to look more intensely, but surely I think the way we go for individual ownership, with the way we focus on individual rather than a community, will be, not able to provide that kind of equitable distribution or social or economic development in this present setup. That's where I will conclude. But I think this made a great learning, which said, let's take the construction from this building, making building from construction to manufacturing, if at all it has to be made more economical. And then we have to think about, affordable living rather than affordable housing, So these are the messages, I think, which are valuable for the architects, both as a education, both as a practice. I think they can do wonder, and they can really contribute to promote the sustainability of this planet Earth. Thank you very much.
Very beautiful and inspiring. Actually, you spoke so little, but you made a lot of sense, TK. Ashok Lall, as the master speaker, would you want to respond to what has so far been said by a few others? Maybe in a minute, because it's already 6:57, we should close.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being patient and responsive. I think, as we were just told by Jeet Kumarji, that what the city can be and should be is the central issue. And we have to work hard at an imagination of the city that can become an engine of equitable development.
Absolutely.
Very clear that a lot of people will have to move to the cities. The employment opportunities and the ability of the rural sector and the smallest towns to absorb all the growth in population, especially the aspirational youth is not there. Cities will grow, and that is where the real issues lie. I don't think we have addressed it so far.
Right, we have not. You said it, earlier on when you said, all that we are doing today goes against the grain, and there was pain in what you, uttered at the time. Thank you so much, Architect Ashok B Lall, for being with us. Thank you, all of you as listeners. the Prem Jain Memorial Trust is, in terms of time, about 26 months old. It was started about 2 months after Dr. Prem Jain passed away in September 2018. Thanks to Payal Jain, who came up with the idea. Thanks to Dr. Viren Paul, who is also a trustee at the Prem Jain Memorial Trust, and many others who are on the governing board, governing council, our Suresh Saab being one of them. Now, the other is that the Prem Jain Memorial Trust is about 250 or 280 events old in just 2 years. This is another event that adds up to it. And what is really significant about it is that each of these events have been discerning, they have been crafted and designed. Payal is first a fashion designer. She chose not to be an architect for some strange reason when she was 20. And I'm sure Ashok also knows, because he knows her from about the time she was a little girl. The thing about it is that every little thing that we have done here at the Prem Jain Memorial Trust has tried to push the frontiers of such ecological possibility, while economic efficiency, of course, has got to be recognized. This business will not run without the economics, as Ashok Lall also will first testify. So this has been the balance that we have brought at the Prem Jain Memorial Trust. And how fortunate can you be to be a daughter and to be doing his Smaran almost every week with some event or the other. So Payal Jain, if you want to, have one, maybe 3 words, 5 words to be spoken, it's your turn. If you don't want to speak, I'll respect that.
No, of course I will. Thank you very much, Doctor. And that was just so sweet. You said I changed my mind about architecture. Yes, had I heard fabulous architects like Ashok Ji and Brinda Somaya, maybe I wouldn't have, I may have made an okay architect too, I think, because I think it's 3-dimensional. But thank you for doing this, and thank you to everybody for being here. It's really, really means a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Payal. Thanks everyone for staying on till 90 minutes, though it was planned for 75 minutes. Thank you, Jeet Kumar Gupta, for having been the host. It's very important that you accepted that. And with a great deal of gratitude, I will say thanks to Ashok Lall for being with us. Such a pleasure, such a delight listening to him every time. There's poetry that he speaks. He's not speaking English. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
You speak so naturally. And Rajesh Lund for being here today. Looking forward to that wonderful presentation, as V. Suresh said, that is coming up exactly 30 days from now on March 27. And all of you out here, you will definitely get your invites. But please do not miss that wonderful session on Coimbatore. And you know the peak that Rajesh gave you of the city being, one of 140 lakes, and how the smart city is being designed around the lakes. Wonderful that the government can think of such things. We will listen to them all in the next session. Thanks once again to all of you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.